Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Friday edition of our class, Perashat HaShavua, Perashat Qorah. Question of the day, the question of the week is, does our Torah's system and structure of society actually better than and resolve the current issues of society that we see today around us? And we're going to address that because of the fact that the end of, or you can almost say the latter half of the latter part of our Perashat Qorah, after the incredible famous episode of Qorah and his sinful entourage, deals with the gifts or the contributions that Am Yisrael must give to the priestly nation, to the Am HaKohanim. And although it's not the first time that we see in the Torah mentionings of obligatory contributions that we have to give to the Kohanim, but it's the first time, or it's the main segment of Torah which addresses Kohanim exclusively for the sake of their support. And we know that there are a grand total of what's called 24 Matalot Kehuna. There are a grand total of 24 what's called gifts or obligatory contributions to Am HaKohanim, to the priestly nation, to Kohanim. They were very much alluded to and mentioned in other parashiot throughout the book of Vayikra when it came to Korbanot. Last week's parasha, Shelach Lecha, one of them was featured specifically, and the Korbanot discussions were mainly on Korbanot. And as a by the way, as a peripheral note, the contribution to Kohen is mentioned and sometimes not directly. Last week's parasha, Shelach Lecha, was a single mizvah focus, but a direct discussion regarding what we must give to the Kohen, exclusive discussion. That was the halah. And coming to this week's parasha, we have a whole group of mizvot, an essential segment of the parasha dedicated to exclusive treatment of Am HaKohanim, of the nation, the priestly nation, the nation of Kohanim, with a segment of our nation from the tribe of Levi, who are Kohanim. Our parasha speaks about Terumah, Terumat Ma'aser, Bikurim, what's called Herem, Bechorot. Now, going back to the list, what we call, we know in the Gemara, Masechet Baba Kama, if you want to look it up, it's Daf Kof Yod Amud Bet, page 110b, is where we have a Beraita that speaks about the 24 Matanot Kehuna. There, the Beraita subcategorizes them into 3, and the Beraita tells us there are 10 that are specifically in the Mikdash, which means that the Kohen derives benefit, each from them derives benefit only in the confines of the Bet HaMikdash. 4 in Yerushalayim, which means that they're not limited to the Bet HaMikdash area, but they are limited to the boundaries of Yerushalayim. And then 10, what's called Bigvulim, on the borders, which means they can be benefited from and eaten by Kohanim outside Yerushalayim, anywhere as long as they're within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. 24 altogether. When you look at this very idea, this concept of obligatory contributions to support a segment of a nation, of a people, what you really very easily can be bothered by is that seems to be counter Torah thinking and the spirit of Jewish society in terms of the fact that we do not advocate dependency in general. We in the Torah, and this seemingly is creating what we would call in our modern day society a welfare state, where we are putting people in a position that they know they can and therefore will rely upon handouts, gifts, charity, and support, which they didn't necessarily earn or work for on their own. and putting them in a permanent status of being supported by others. And when we use the term welfare state in our society, by and large, it's used as a negative statement, where we created a welfare system and food stamp system, and it's a vicious cycle where certain minorities can't get out of it, and we don't. And of course, if we push them to become independent and give them greater opportunity, then we're called all types of names and it's politicized. That's a negative to welfare state. What's going on really with our structure and our obligations here to completely support the Kohanim, the priestly segment of our nation, and to some extent the Leviim, to a great extent the Leviim as well. Really, you can say all of Shevet Levi, the tribe, one of the 12, it's not one of the official 12 tribes, but it's a tribe of Am Yisrael that has to be supported. The Torah mandates this. I'm going to throw in another question that seems unrelated to this, but I'll throw it in anyway. And that is just interesting to note or to ask ourselves what the connection might be with these laws of Matanot Kehuna, Kohanim obligatory contributions that are at the end of this parasha with the highlight of this parasha, which is the episode of Qorah and his rebellion. We'll keep that in mind as well. To answer this question, we're going to quote one of two halachot that will be featured in this class, and both of them are found at the end of halachot Shemitah v'Yobel of the Rambam. It's the 13th chapter of the laws of Shemitah and Yobel. The last two halachot we'll be reading. We'll read now, unless I'll paraphrase, halacha Yud Bet, to give us the answer to that first problem and that issue. So the Rambam asks rhetorically, why is it that the tribe of Levi did not merit getting any inherited portion, an official right to land in Eretz Yisrael, right? When the land was broken up, Shevet Levi was not given boundaries. They were given a total of 42 plus 6 cities, the Arei Miklat, to reside in. It wasn't really their ownership. The laws of ownership of land doesn't apply to them. And why are they so much different? And the reason given by the Rambam is that because, I'll give the terminology in Hebrew first, Hubdal la'abod et Hashem l'sharoto ulhorot derachav ha'isharim u'mishpatav v'sadichim l'rabim. Because they have been excluded, or they have been distinguished and set aside, you can say, as a tribe to serve God, to worship him, to demonstrate, to teach, to show and guide the rest of Am Yisrael in the just, right, perfect ways, righteous ways of the Torah to the multitudes. They are the teachers, they are the rabbis, they are the hachamim, they are the guides. That's their job. As the pasuk says in Perashat, Zot HaBeracha, part of the blessing of Moshe Rabbeinu, Shevet Levi was Yoru Mishpatecha LiYaakov v'Toratecha LiYisrael. They will teach God's Torah to the rest of the nation. Therefore, says the Rambam, they have been set aside. They're exclusive. They're distinct from the rest of the nation. There's no draft. They're not drafted to war. They don't have to go to war at all. They don't inherit land. And they don't really have a lot of the rights that regular citizens of Am Yisrael has. Because of that, they can't become wealthy. There's no capitalistic Kohen really, and he has a limitation to his wealth because of the fact that, says the Rambam, he calls them Chel Hashem. They're the army of God, taken from the book of the Rabbi, Alav Hashalom, Rabbi Schneerson of the Lubavitch, the grand Lubavitcher Rebbe, or he took it from this book. And that is the army of God. They are there to represent HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore he merited them. It's not us that are supporting a welfare state. It's God that's mandating that we support those who serve him, and there are those who serve the nation. We need them. They represent us. They guide us. They teach us. We're lost without them. And it's a privilege for us. It's our privilege. It's our zechut to be able to support them, because when we do that, we're really supporting ourselves and doing Am Yisrael a great favor. And therefore, this is far from the welfare state, as this is being portrayed as an exclusive class, you can say, of people, a distinct and very privileged class of people that are that are being placed on a pedestal and being treated in an exalted and very distinguished manner in Am Yisrael. It's almost the opposite of the welfare state. But really, that bears out another question and triggers what might be even more disturbing of a trend. Before I get to that, it's important for us to mention that there's really great, not only for us, great consequences for supporting them, but in terms of the Kohanim, we really don't put them into any pressured position to support themselves. And the Sefer HaChanuch explains that we really preserve their dignity. We don't make them feel like they have to go out and make a living. They don't put them in a position of pressure to try to sustain themselves. We make it readily available for them. And we also don't make them lower themselves, so to speak. These distinguished people to, have to involve themselves in menial tasks, right? We really take care of them, as they say. But what issue and what question does this trigger? Doesn't this sort of seem like a class system? Doesn't this sort of seem what our society would look at somewhat as racist, as biased, as labeling people in a certain class that are deserving more than other people are deserving of? I think this would be very politically incorrect in our day and age. And in fact, unfortunately, we see in our day and age that races are used to divide, and everyone must fall into a category of race, and then therefore a category of being those who are oppressed versus the oppressors, and creates a very divisive society when we label and when we insist upon keeping people in a category and in a box and not letting them be independent, and not just opening up our terminology so that there aren't, the blue, white, black, and they're just people. We don't let ourselves let go of that. And we play a race card all the time. And we play the victimhood card all the time. And that's something that exists in our society, but in a very negative manner. Doesn't this seem like very much a class system where there's a higher class in society that can't be touched, and then there's a lower class in society? And to address that, we're going to read the other halakha from the Rambam. But before that, we'll introduce it, and I can say it's probably the source of the Rambam's sentiment that we're going to read is from Pirkei Avot, a famous Mishnah at the end of the fourth chapter, towards the end of the fourth chapter in Pirkei Avot. And that is Rabbi Shimon says, Shlosha ketarim hem. There are three crowns, famously we know them: Keter Torah, Keter Kehuna, and Keter Malchut. The crown, let's address the second and the third. The crown of priestlyhood, being a Kohen. The crown of Malchut, royalty. Now those two crowns cannot be earned. They are limited. You have to be, let's say, lucky enough to be from the descendants of not only Shevet Levi, from Kohanim, to be a Kohen. Amazingly, that string of lineage survived history, and it's still here. We know who they are, but you have to be amongst them. You can't choose to be a Kohen, and you can't choose to be a king, obviously. You have to be descendant of the string, a line of lineage from David HaMelech, and then you're royalty in Shevet Yehuda, of course. But the other crown is Keter Torah. And what the commentators say is that this crown is actually a greater crown if it can be achieved. And what's amazing about this crown is that it's up for grabs. This is a crown, as Hachamim tell us, that kol haroseh litol yabo v'yitol. Whoever wants to achieve, whoever wants to be able to accomplish and end up being categorized and exalted and labeled as accomplishing this and being deserving to be crowned with the crown of Torah can be. It's wide open. And so therefore it's far from a class system, because the third of the three classes, or one of the three classes, which is Keter Torah, which is looked up upon greater than the other two, is one that is absolutely up for grabs, free for taking, and based on a person's self-determination, independence, and individual effort, and his will, his free will, to commit to Torah mitzvot, and to spend a lifetime building his knowledge of Torah, living a life of Torah, and teaching Torah to others, and serving the community and the nation with his Torah accomplishments. And so far from a class system, this is a wide open system in which we allow for anybody to become exalted to a prestigious level and earn the greatest of all crowns. And that leads us to what I like to call a wondrous halakha stated by the Rambam. It's an amazing halakha. Interestingly, it's a law that sometimes you hear rabbis use as a support for the kollel system. I disagree that this is specifically supportive of our current system we have going right now, but certainly in the spirit of things, it is. And the Rambam says, I'll just read the first few words in Hebrew. He says, V'lo shevet Levi bilvad. We're not only talking about the tribe of Levi. He says, rather, every single member of Am Yisrael, asher nadeba rucho oto, who has become motivated and inspired, and is a feeling of growth, of self-growth and elevation, and he understood and chooses on his own to stand before God, to serve, to be a committed servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to worship, to know God, and took upon himself to go I'll paraphrase him, to use his innate potential to the highest level that he can. And relinquished from himself these self-imposed burdens that most members of society put on themselves, i.e. making money, being able to gather wealth and assets and physical and financial accomplishments. He absolutely pays no mind to that, which most people pursue their entire lives. This type of person who has committed himself only to God and to God's Torah, he says he has been sanctified Kodesh Kadashim, into the Holy of Holies, V'hiyeh Hashem Chalko v'Nachalato, and God is his portion, La'ad u'Omer Alamim, forever, V'yizkelo ba'olam hazeh devar hamaspik lo k'mo shezecha l'kohanim, and he merits in this world that which is sufficient for him to survive, like the Kohanim. And he alludes to the fact that perhaps Jewish society should take it upon themselves to support such an incredible individual, because this individual has decided to be great. And he decided to take upon himself, not laziness, not shirking his responsibilities. Rather, he is single, one-track minded, and that is commitment to God, achieving the greatness within God's Torah and Mitzvot. And I care not about financial achievements. This is the type of person, a rare type of person, perhaps many of them, but not your common citizen, that Am Yisrael has to recognize and say, we need this person. We need to support such a person. And this is the epitome of the counter to a class system. This is in contradistinction to a system where we forcefully place people or don't let people be placed in certain classes. This is absolute independence, where a person can achieve and reach even a status which is equal to and above an official class created in the Torah, and that's Am HaKohanim. And there is no limit, therefore, in the Torah, Jewish Am Yisrael society to the achievements of an individual and to the treatment because of that, consequently, that we offer him. It's because of this, I believe, and this ability to achieve such heights, that the idea of the Matanot Kohanim, our obligation and contribution to Am HaKohanim, and the idea of our support of people who take upon themselves to become great and to serve Jewish life, is in the same parasha of Qorah. Because Qorah, in his arrogance, demanded leadership. I deserve greatness. I deserve to be placed in the situation of a great leader. You never need to want a position. You just need to want to be great, and you need to become great through your commitment to Torah and Mizvot and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then you will be placed in that position by society. To achieve greatness, you have to not think about greatness. You have to not worry about being looked upon as great. You just have to be driven towards greatness, and you will be inevitably be put in that position. And that's why Qorah shouldn't have worried about that. And the opposition to that is the Matanot Kehuna. And anyone else who wants to be deserving of that type of support by being recognized through his self-determination and his inspiration and self-motivation to achieve the highest level of greatness and the highest class of Jewish society as a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen. Shabbat Shalom.